Imagine, if you will, taking a highly decorated, brilliant Supreme Court justice,
Okay.
someone with decades of jurisprudence experience, right? Whose legal mind is just an absolute steel trap.
Right, real heavyweight.
Exactly. Now imagine dressing them head to toe in a neon polka dot clown suit,
Oh, wow.
complete with the big red squeaky nose, the wig, everything, and having them deliver a flawless, historically significant, totally airtight constitutional ruling.
That is a completely absurd visual.
It is. It feels impossible to take seriously. And yet, if you close your eyes and just, listen to the words, the logic is absolutely indisputable.
I see where you're going with this.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are taking a stack of your sources and extracting the ultimate insight into how we judge truth.
And this is going to be a fun one.
It really is. Our mission today is to decode a completely serious, rigorously proven mathematical paper that is wearing a deeply inappropriate linguistic hat.
Yeah, it creates this intense cognitive dissonance for the reader. I mean, you are confronted with a presentation that just feels like a joke.
A massive joke.
Right, but as you read closer, you realize you literally cannot argue with the underlying truth. It's actually a brilliant stress test for whether we can separate formal logical content from its semantic register.
Semantic register being like the tone and vocabulary used to deliver that logic.
Exactly. The packaging, basically.
Okay, let's unpack this. We are looking at a document titled, and I quote, "No-Cap Fixed-Point Theory.md."
Which is just a wild title for a math paper.
Completely wild. And it was authored by the mysteriously named Anonymous Department of Applied Brainrot.
Gotta love the internet.
Right. So the paper is actually a formal proof of something called the Banach Fixed-Point Theorem. But it is written entirely using some of the worst, most chronically online internet slang you can possibly imagine.
It really is aggressive.
It's so aggressive. So we are going to separate this quote-unquote brain rot from the actual flawless math underneath it. And we'll explore what happens when the most rigorous mathematical truths collide with modern internet culture.
And, to appreciate the scale of what the author is doing here, we really have to look at how they establish the rules of the document itself.
Right. They set the ground rules right away.
Exactly. Before laying out any geometry or calculus, the author introduces the Brainrot density function.
The Brainrot density function.
Yes. They define this mathematical function as b of s equals the minimum of 1 and s divided by 8. And the variable s here represents the section number of the paper.
Okay, wait. So let me do the math. If I'm reading section 1, the density is 1/8.
Right.
So it's mostly normal with just a little sprinkle of weird slang.
Just a taste?
But by the time I hit section 8, the fraction is 8/8, or just 1.
Yep, you hit 100% saturation.
That is hilarious. So it just gradually gets worse?
It does. That deliberate escalation is key. I mean, the prose becomes increasingly, quote, cooked, as you read, intentionally corrupting the language.
Right.
But the crucial underlying detail is that the function never touches the theorem itself. The mathematical integrity remains completely pristine.
So the math is untouched.
Exactly untouched. And to prove that, we have to start where the paper starts, which is setting the environment. Section 2 introduces classical metric spaces.
Okay, metric spaces.
In mathematics, a metric space isn't just an empty room. It's actually a set of points equipped with a highly specific, rigorous way to measure the distance between any two of those points.
So for you listening, think about it like having a universal, unbreakable ruler. Like the distance from point A to point B must be identical to the distance from B to A.
Precisely.
And it has to obey the triangle inequality, which is really just a fancy way of saying the shortest distance between 2 points is always a straight line.
Right.
Like if you take a detour to point C, the journey gets longer, you can't cheat the distance.
And I love how the Anonymous Department of Applied Brainrot defines this concept. They state that a metric space is a way to measure distance that refuses to let geometry become completely delulu.
I can't believe we're saying delulu in a math deep dive, but it makes sense, which is like mathematically precise when you think about it.
It really is.
Because if a space allowed the distance between 2 points to magically change depending on your mood, or allowed a detour to somehow be shorter than a straight line, the geometry would be delusional.
It would be impossible to map.
Exactly. So we have our non-delusional space, and we have our universal ruler. But, I mean, a space is entirely useless if nothing actually happens inside it.
Right. You need some action.
Yeah. How do we introduce a process or a movement into this environment?
So we introduce a mapping function, specifically one the paper refers to as a contraction. Or, in the parlance of the author, this is a map that possesses, quote, contractive Rizz.
Contractive Rizz! Incredible.
I know. But definition 2.5 outlines this beautifully. A mathematical map is really just a rule for taking a point and moving it somewhere else.
Okay.
So if a map is a contraction, it means that every single time you apply this rule, any 2 points in the space will be brought closer together.
It actively shrinks the distance between them.
Exactly.
And the strength of that pull, the aggressiveness of that shrinking, is measured by a number the paper names the Rizz coefficient, which they represent by the letter Q.
Yes, the Rizz coefficient. And for the map to officially have contractive Rizz, that Q coefficient must sit strictly between 0 and 1.
Got it.
And the closer Q is to 0, the stronger the pull. So if Q is 0.1, the map is violently shrinking the distance between points with every single step.
So it's pulling them together really fast.
Right. The paper refers to this state as being extremely locked in.
Extremely locked in.
Yeah. On the other hand, if Q is, say, 0.9999999, the distance is still shrinking, but incredibly slowly. As the paper notes, the map technically has Rizz, but it is, quote, making everybody wait.
That is such a funny way to phrase a slow convergence. But let me try to make this tangible for the listener because, abstract math can get floaty fast.
Sure, yeah.
So is this contractive Rizz essentially like a gravitational pull? Like imagine dropping a marble into a perfectly smooth, curved bowl.
Okay, I like that.
No matter where you drop that marble on the edge of the bowl, the shape of the bowl forces it to roll down and eventually settle at the exact same spot at the very bottom.
Yep.
Is the shape of the bowl the contraction?
The shape of the bowl is an excellent way to visualize the map, absolutely. And gravity acts as the engine driving the iteration.
Okay.
And that Rizz coefficient Q that represents the steepness of the bowl's sides.
Oh, that makes perfect sense.
Right. So a very steep bowl, which would be a low Q value, means the marble rockets to the center almost instantly.
Extremely locked in.
Exactly. But a very wide, nearly flat bowl where Q is really close to 1 means the marble just swirls around lazily, taking an agonizingly long time to finally reach the center.
It's making everybody wait.
Precisely.
Okay, so we have the landscape, our metric space. We have the rule of gravity pulling things together, which is our contractive Rizz. But to actually see this mathematical machinery work, we have to start dropping marbles.
We do.
We have to set a sequence in motion. So what happens next?
Well, this is where we encounter the Picard iteration. It's a really foundational concept in classical mathematics, which this paper delightfully recursons the Bro sequence.
The Bro sequence.
Yeah.
And I just have to mention the footnote attached to that translation in the paper just says, no additional mathematical structure is implied by this term.
It's so aggressively deadpan. I love it.
It really is. But practically speaking, how does one actually execute a Bro sequence?
The mechanics are remarkably simple, really. You choose a starting point anywhere in your space.
Right.
It genuinely does not matter where.
Okay.
You apply your contractive map to that point, which moves you to a new location. Then you take that new location and plug it right back into the map again, and you just iterate.
So the output becomes the new input.
Exactly. By 1 becomes by 2, by 2 becomes by 3, and so on. And because your map has that contractive Rizz, every single step you take gets geometrically smaller.
Because it's a contraction.
Right. The points are being forced closer and closer together with every iteration.
Which introduces the idea of Cauchy sequences. The paper actually translates a Cauchy sequence as a sequence ending the beef.
I mean, it is an incredibly evocative way to describe a deep mathematical concept.
It really paints a picture.
It does. In a Cauchy sequence, the later terms get arbitrarily close to one another. So the sequence might be taking wild, sweeping jumps across the space at the very beginning.
Like it's arguing with itself.
Right. But eventually, the distance between the current step and the next step shrinks to almost nothing. The sequence, as the author writes, stops beefing with itself.
It calms down. But wait, hold on. Just because the points are getting closer and closer together with every step doesn't necessarily mean they actually hit a final target, right?
Ah, good point.
Because I'm thinking of Zeno's paradox, right? Where you constantly have the distance to a wall, but theoretically you never actually touch it.
Right.
Or what if the sequence is zooming in on a specific coordinate, but that coordinate is essentially a pothole? Like, what if the destination it's trying to reach doesn't actually exist within the rules of our specific metric space?
Well, you've just identified the exact reason why the theorem requires the concept of completeness.
Okay.
Because you can absolutely have a sequence that calms down and zeroes in on a target, only to find a void where the target should be.
Just a hole in the space.
Exactly. And the paper categorizes this exact scenario as a mathematically licensed ghosting event.
A ghosting event.
Yeah. The sequence approaches a limit, but at the last possible mathematical second, the limit simply isn't there.
Sounds devastating for an algorithm, honestly.
It breaks the entire process. That is why the Banach Fixed-Point Theorem demands a complete metric space. A complete space is one with no potholes.
Okay, got it.
It guarantees that if a sequence stops beefing with itself and zeroes in on a specific location, that location physically exists within the space.
It's a real destination. So when we combine all of these ingredients, like a complete metric space, a map with contractive Rizz, and a sequence ending the beef, we finally arrive at the central theorem of the document.
We do.
The Banach Fixed-Point Theorem, which basically guarantees that there is exactly one unique, immovable point in the entire space that the sequence will inevitably reach.
Right.
And the paper calls this destination the sigma point.
True.
And the ultimate conclusion of the theorem, quote, bro converges, no cap.
What's fascinating here is how the paper handles the actual proof of this convergence in Appendix B.
Oh, right, the appendix.
Yeah, they provide the maximum Brainrot restatement of the main proof.
That title alone.
I know. You read phrases describing the geometric decay as absolutely ratio-checking the tail and declaring that any fraudulent second sigma point is deleted.
It literally reads like a teenager aggressively streaming a video game.
It really does.
But I want to pause on the phrase ratio checking the tail, because you mentioned earlier that the underlying math here is pristine.
It is.
So for the listener who hasn't taken advanced calculus or real analysis recently, what is the actual mathematical engine driving that proof? Like, what is the epsilon delta logic doing under the hood there?
That's a great question. So epsilon delta logic is essentially a mathematically rigorous game of shrinking goalposts.
Shrinking goalposts, okay.
Imagine you're trying to trap a moving target. You give me a tiny, incredibly strict error margin, and let's call that margin epsilon.
All right.
My job is to find a specific starting point in time, which we call delta, after which the sequence is absolutely guaranteed to stay trapped inside your tiny error margin forever.
So no matter how small I make my goalpost, you can always find a point where the sequence gets stuck inside it.
Exactly. And when the paper talks about ratio checking the tail, it is describing how the infinite sum of all the remaining steps, which is the tail, is strictly bounded by a geometric ratio. No matter how small you make your epsilon goalpost, the contraction guarantees I can find a delta that traps the sequence.
Wow. So the slang is just a wildly distracting presentation layer over a very elegant classical trap.
It's brilliant disguise, really.
So in a perfect theoretical mathematical void, everything converges beautifully. The sequence gets trapped. The marble hits the exact atomic center of the bowl.
Right.
But what happens in reality? Because, algorithms usually don't run in perfect theoretical voids. They run on messy computers with rounding errors and limited memory.
Oh, absolutely. And the paper anticipates the messiness of the real world in Section 3, which is titled Reality Checks.
Reality checks.
Let's say you're running a massive algorithm on a supercomputer simulating weather patterns using these exact iterations.
Okay.
How do you know how far you are from the final sigma point if you haven't reached it yet? You need a way to measure your error without knowing the answer key.
Right, because if you knew the answer, you wouldn't be running the simulation.
Exactly. Classical numerical analysis provides a posteriori error bound for this exact problem. And the paper translates this as the touchgrass bound.
The touchgrass bound. That might actually be the most brilliant translation in the entire text.
It's so clever.
Because touching grass means grounding yourself in the real world, stepping away from the theoretical internet space.
Right.
But mathematically, how do you measure your distance to a destination you haven't even found yet?
You utilize that geometric series we just discussed. You don't need to look at the final destination. You only need to look at the difference between your current step and your previous step.
Okay.
Or, as the paper phrases it, you observe how hard the latest iterate is still tweaking.
Tweaking, I love it.
Because the contraction follows a strict geometric ratio, observing the size of the current step allows you to calculate the absolute maximum distance the sequence could possibly travel for the rest of eternity.
Oh, wow. So if the steps you're taking are still huge, the algorithm is tweaking hard, and you know you're far from the end. But if the steps are microscopic, you know you're super close. That is incredibly practical.
It is very practical.
But what if the map itself is flawed from the beginning? Because the paper calls this perturbation theory, or, quote, scuffed but recoverable.
Yes, scuffed but recoverable. Yeah. And this is a major concern in computational mathematics. What happens if your operator is slightly off?
Right.
The author actually jokes about the code being implemented by a programmer who renamed a variable at 2:43 a.m. and introduced a tiny bug.
We've all been there.
Oh, definitely. So the theorem proves that if your map is slightly scuffed, the final fixed point will shift. You won't land exactly where you originally intended.
Okay, that makes sense.
But how much the target shifts depends entirely on that Rizz coefficient Q.
Oh, going back to our bowl analogy, the steepness of the sides.
Exactly right. If Q is small, meaning you have a very steep bowl, the marble might settle slightly off-center due to the scuff, but it won't move much.
Because the sides are so steep, it forces it down near the middle anyway.
Exactly. The system is highly robust. But if Q is close to 1, that very wide, nearly flat bowl, even a microscopic bump or scuff in the code can send the marble settling miles away from the intended target.
It just rolls off somewhere else.
Yeah. The paper concludes that while a map with weak Rizz might still technically obey the laws of math, it is not emotionally stable.
Mathematically legal, but emotionally unstable. Honestly, we've all been there too.
So true.
But I do have to push back on the next concept they introduce, because the paper brings up inexact iteration, which it describes as permanent background yapping.
Yes, the background yapping.
This represents the numerical noise introduced at every single step of a calculation because computers inevitably round off trailing decimal points.
Right, floating point arithmetic is never infinitely precise. You always have a tiny bit of error entering the system on every single cycle.
So if the computer rounds off and pushes the calculation slightly off course at step 1 and then step 2 and then step infinity, doesn't the whole bro converges idea shatter into pieces? Like, if there's permanent background yapping literally forever, we never actually reach the sigma point. The theorem fails in practice, doesn't it?
Well, this raises a really important question, and it explores the difference between a mathematical ideal and an engineering reality.
Okay.
The theorem absolutely does not fail. Instead, it finds an equilibrium. Think of it as a tug-of-war. The contraction is constantly pulling the point inward toward the true center, while the computational noise is constantly bumping it outward.
So they fight each other.
They do. And ultimately, the sequence doesn't hit the exact atomic center of the sigma point. Instead, it enters a specific bounded error neighborhood around the point, and it never leaves.
So it gets close enough to the target and just buzzes around it in a tiny cloud.
Precisely. As the paper eloquently states, this isn't a failure of the math. Quote, "The algorithm is locked in as hard as the noise budget permits."
I love that phrasing.
The math fundamentally accounts for the fact that the computation has roommates. It recognizes the noise and bounds it.
It's incredibly forgiving. Math is so often taught as this rigid, unforgiving discipline where one wrong decimal ruins the universe.
Oh, absolutely.
But this theorem is essentially saying, hey, I know it's noisy in here and your calculator isn't perfect. Just get as close as you can, fight the noise, and hold your ground.
That's a great way to summarize it.
Now, to prove this isn't just an elaborate linguistic prank happening in the theoretical void, the paper actually proves this locking in behavior with real numbers.
They provide concrete examples, yeah. They start with a simple linear equation, which they call affine farming.
Affine farming.
And the map is defined as t of x equals 1 plus x over 4. Now, no matter what number you start with in the entire universe, if you run it through that equation, take the result, and run it through again, you will inevitably arrive at the fraction 4/3.
As the author says, bro converges with receipts.
With receipts.
But here's where it gets really interesting. They don't just stick to simple algebra. The paper provides a nonlinear example that honestly blew my mind because of how accessible it is.
Oh, the cosine example.
Yes. It turns out that the simple cosine function, the exact same function you learned in high school trigonometry, is low-key locked in.
It really is. The interval from 0 to 1 under the cosine function satisfies all the rigorous hypotheses of the Banach Fixed-Point Theorem we've been discussing.
Amazing.
It is a complete metric space with no potholes, and cosine acts as a contraction with a Rizz coefficient of approximately 0.84.
Which means, if you are listening to this right now, you can literally prove a graduate-level math theorem on your phone.
You really can.
If you open your calculator app, make sure it's in radian mode, type in absolutely any number, and just start mashing the cosine button over and over, cosine of the answer, cosine of the answer.
Just keep hitting it.
Watch the numbers on the screen. They swing wildly at first, jumping back and forth, but eventually they stop beefing. They zero in.
And they will always, without fail, lock into the exact same irrational number, approximately 2773 0.085.
It's called the Dottie number. Even cosine, as the paper observes, eventually stops posting and settles down.
It's a beautiful interactive proof that you literally hold in your pocket. Which brings us to the final and perhaps most philosophically profound concept of the paper.
The Delulu exclusion principle.
In classical terms, this is the uniqueness clause of the theorem. Proving that a sequence finds a destination is really only half the battle in mathematics.
Okay, what's the other half?
The harder battle is proving that it is the only destination. The Delulu exclusion principle states that you cannot have two distinct, stable, fixed points, both claiming to be the unique limit of the same contractive geometry. The fabric of the math physically does not allow it.
But why is proving uniqueness so critical? Because in standard algebra, equations have multiple answers all the time, right? Like a parabola crosses the axis twice. Why is it a big deal here?
Because the entire premise of the contractive Rizz is that it shrinks the distance between any 2 points.
Oh, right.
So if you had two distinct sigma points, let's call them point A and point B, and they're both perfectly stable, the distance between them would have to be 0, because the map forces all points together.
I see.
But if the distance between them is 0, they aren't 2 points. They are the exact same point.
Ah. So if you're running a massive supercomputer algorithm and your system spits out 2 alleged sigma points, what just happened?
Well, the theorem isn't confused. You are.
You messed up.
Yeah, the paper lists the possibilities. Maybe your map isn't actually contraction and you miscalculated the Rizz coefficient. Maybe your metric space has a pothole you didn't see, or quite simply, somebody has cooked the assumptions.
Yeah, cook the assumptions.
By the fundamental laws of formal logic, fraudulent second sigma points are forcibly deleted. The geometry always has the final ratio.
Okay, so we've walked through the valley of the shadow of Brainrot here.
We really have.
We've explored metric spaces that refuse to be Delulu, bro sequences ending the beef, touch grass bounds, and the permanent background yapping of the universe. So what does this all mean? Like, why does this completely bizarre document matter to someone who isn't a mathematician?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this document serves as a profoundly revealing mirror. It proves that truth relies entirely on logical structure.
Yeah.
The formal, mechanical content is what matters, not the emotional condition or the professional tone of the sentence reporting it.
We spend so much time in our society judging the validity of information by how professional it sounds.
Right. We assume that if something is written in dense, academic, jargon-heavy language, it must be rigorous and true.
Exactly. And conversely, if something sounds casual or slang-heavy or youthful, we just dismiss it as inherently unserious or flawed.
But this paper flips that bias entirely on its head. I mean, the language is, as the author cheerfully admits, professionally unwell.
Professionally unwell?
But the underlying logic is absolutely bulletproof. The meme did not damage the math. It shows us that a competent mind, or maybe a competent AI system, which the paper suggests this is a stress test for, should be able to recognize stylistic absurdity without mistaking it for factual incorrectness.
Because to do otherwise is a category error, or in the paper's terms, a skill issue.
A massive skill issue.
A massive skill issue. And it leaves you with this final, really provocative thought to mull over. We just watched a deeply complex, graduate-level mathematical proof be perfectly communicated using the slang of a teenager on a Twitch stream.
Yeah.
The rigor wasn't lost at all. It was just repackaged.
Right.
So if a competent AI can seamlessly translate advanced topology into custom semantic registers without losing a single drop of truth, are we approaching a future where standardized academic gatekeeping is just obsolete?
It makes you wonder.
Could every dense textbook, every legal ruling, every intimidating scientific paper soon be custom translated into whatever specific vocabulary your brain absorbs best?
That's a wild thought.
Clarity of thought and formality of tone are just not the same thing. It turns out you really can put a Supreme Court justice in a neon clown suit. The outfit might make you laugh, the presentation might be utterly absurd, but when they bang that gavel, the truth is still the truth. No cap.